I too echo Nick's acknowledgement of the traditional owners on these ancestral lands and waterways of the Kulin Nation on which we're gathering. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and to elders of other Indigenous communities in Australia. I also take this moment to acknowledge the diverse peoples and cultures who have been welcomed to this nation, along with the laws, freedoms, rights and faiths they have brought or represent. Recognising this plurality is crucial given the never-ending assault on difference, which too often permeates our society today. As Nick said, I've had the privilege to address the club on a couple of previous occasions, and I thank the club afresh for the invitation today, just over a year into my role as chair of the ADC. A few weeks ago, apropos of nothing, someone sent me the following image. Well, why not? I'm sure the mayor of the city of Frankston thinks it's a really good idea. And if the Bayside News wants to call it Port Phillip Bay, the mayor can ban the paper's reporters from the council chamber on Monday evenings. If we live in a world where the truth is whatever those in power say it is, we can call anything whatever we like. We can call Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator. We can call his countrymen Nazis and call his nation part of Russia. The truth matters, because when the truth is replaced by lies, democracy and people are in danger. When the truth shines light on autocracy, the truth, I should say, shines light on autocracy, hence the Washington Post slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." I happen to agree, as I'm sure most of you do too. We live in a world in which a strong, free media is needed like never before, and a moment when a strong, free news media is struggling to survive like never before. Revenue streams have been choked off by the inexorable march of the tech titans, Meta, Google, Amazon, X, and the rest. Now, we can't complain about technology change and innovation. However, there are many things with which we can take issue. Newsrooms have been slashed, long-respected mastheads have been thinned or closed, journalists laid off in their dozens, content cut back. The press is facing eye-wateringly expensive lawfare to prevent them reporting truths powerful people want kept quiet. American legislators have threatened to widen libel laws to scare editors and proprietors into submission. To make things worse, media oligarchs are busily undermining the integrity of their publishing to advance their wider business interests. Jeff Bezos and his behaviour is increasingly appalling. Preventing a presidential election editorial, effectively censoring the op-ed page, paying $40 million to the president's wife for a documentary series, and maybe, perhaps the greatest crime against humanity of them all, putting 15-year-old reruns of The Apprentice on his streaming platform, Amazon Prime. If the newspaper that uncovered the Watergate scandal and published the Pentagon Papers can be forced by its proprietor against the will of its journalists to toe the line like this, who is safe, I ask? Politicians are joining the suppression. Membership at the White House press pool is being vetted, including the banning of the Associated Press. Voice of America has been silenced and is accused of being radical propaganda by the administration. FBI Director Kash Patel says he intends to come after journalists. President Trump wants reporting from MSNBC and CNN declared illegal. All this in the country known for the First Amendment. And let's recall its magic. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Add to this the manipulation of algorithms by corporations and state actors. With every passing day, it's becoming clear that democracies need to talk urgently about how to maintain and protect a free media. You simply can't defend your freedom without defending media freedom. I have an allergy to slogans. However, in this case, it is as simple as that. No freedom without media freedom, period. For media freedom, we must maintain strong journalistic standards and find ways to keep our media industry economically viable. I want to touch briefly on those two things. To the first, maintaining journalistic standards, I make the following point. The ABC will aim to hold reliably high standards. I don't want to indulge in grandiloquent terms of being the standard setter. We all know we all offer human frailty writ large at times. However, I do want to hold our journalism to account as having defendable values as to reliable performance against consistent standards set out in the ABC Act, and I quote, "To ensure that the gathering and presentation by the corporation of news and information is accurate and impartial according to recognised standards of objective journalism." In 2024, the Digital News Report published by the University of Canberra found that the most important factor for Australians in deciding to trust a news outlet was journalistic standards. At the ABC and elsewhere, the role of journalists is to engage in objective reporting. Objectivity is a definitional requirement of the profession. No objectivity, no true journalism. We are journalists reporting the truth, or we are propagandists defending untruths, or worse still, promoting them. It is sometimes argued that the job of journalists is to push objective truth. I agree there are great and noble causes writers must defend, but not by sacrificing their objectivity. Our good colleague Martin Barron, until 2021 editor of the Washington Post, had to grapple with this very issue at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. He wrote the following in his 2024 book, Collision of Power. I quote at length because it's a crucial point. The Post's long-standing guidelines were brief, clear and absolute. We avoid active involvement in any partisan cause, politics, community affairs, social action, demonstrations that could compromise or seem to compromise our ability to report and edit fairly. He continues, when we lose the perception and reality of independence, we give the public a reason to question our authority as well. They will see us as activists or partisans. As journalists, our role should be to observe, inquire, investigate, document, and effectively communicate. Every profession comes with some constraints, and we have ours. When we lose the perception and reality of independence, we give the public a reason to question our authority as well. It's because our perceived independence is so central to our role as a public broadcaster, and because the role of a public broadcaster is so easily traduced by its opponents, that we cannot give an inch on this point. And as long as I'm chair, we will not give, pardon me, so much as a millimetre. The ABC has earned the public's trust for the better part of a century, and we will not be compromising it under any circumstances. Guided by Section 6 of the Act, our Charter, and Section 8 of the Act, which describes the duties of the board, which speak to the core values of independence, integrity, and editorial objectivity. We are above politics, and that's how it must stay. The nation needs to be able to rely on it. As to the second point, giving our free media the resources it needs to continue doing its job, there are many things that can be said. Naturally, the most pleasing way to achieve this is for media enterprises to innovate, to find new ways of reaching larger audiences, and in doing so, to secure that success. The success of streaming and podcasting and substacking demonstrates that people are hungry for great content and willing to pay for it. I'm sure everyone in the audience has their favourite podcasts and Substacks. I have many, too many perhaps. The problem is that, like everything on the internet, these efforts often free ride on news gathering. In other words, they get use of the really expensive stuff for free. The big issue we must confront and answer is how to increase resources needed to create quality news, or what I call an investment for democracy. Those investment dollars for democracy simply must be found. Some have managed. Prior to its most recent difficulties, the Washington Post significantly increased its readership, subscriptions and revenue, enabling it to add many new journalists and to double its news division. Pursuing quality news without compromise paid off. Sadly, I fear the recent compromises to the once great newspaper's integrity are seriously endangering its future. Why would you subscribe to a timid and submissive Washington Post when you could support a gutsy New York Times? Perhaps most impressively, the Financial Times, just 20 years ago, a declining masthead with a narrowing readership base, now has around 1.3 million subscribers worldwide, 1.2 million of whom are digital subscribers. For good reason. Many now regard the FT as one of the highest quality news organisations in the world. Again, I'm guessing that, like me, many of you in this room are subscribers. And so too, the mighty journal, although they always insist on calling it a newspaper, The Economist. The FT and The Economist have done it by taking the digital world seriously and by putting emphasis on quality journalism. So is the BBC. These are things we at the ABC are also doing. For those interested, I recommend the FT's visionary former leader Lionel Barber's brilliant account of his time as an editor, compulsory reading for any serious journalist and news editor looking for ways to strengthen their industry. Here is the challenge for Australia's media organisations and for its government: to find a way of getting a bigger and fairer proportion of digital revenues back into the hands of the people who produce the content, the news. The Copyright Agency, along with the public lending rights and electronic lending rights, prove workable forms of revenue redistribution are possible. Those wonderful mechanisms do in fact work. This is a global issue. A titanic battle is underway to prevent sovereign nations from acquiring US-based content aggregators like Apple, Meta, Google, Amazon and X from paying their way. Critics are describing initiatives like the Media Bargaining Code in Australia and the proposed News Bargaining Incentive as forms of coercive and discriminatory tax and effectively non-tariff trade barriers. Parliament will have to decide the way forward. In doing so, it must be clear about the real issue. This is not just about commercial interests. It's about the future health of democracy and ultimately about national sovereignty. One direct way of supporting Australian democracy is before our very nose, to properly invest in the ABC. We perform as well as we can with the allocations provided, and we are grateful to the Australian government for providing it to enable the ABC to serve Australians. Last year, our base funding was increased as part of MyEFO. Effectively, the government has now reversed the impact of the indexation pause that the ABC was subject to between 2019 and 2022. We truly appreciate the stabilisation of ABC funding after years of decline. But the ABC's funding level remains extremely low by historical standards. In real terms, it is more than $150 million per annum less than it was in 2013. In the year 2000, funding for the ABC comprised 0.31% of Commonwealth outlays. Today, it's around 0.12%, and we are called upon to do much more with it. As a result, Australia currently invests 40% less per person in public broadcasting than the average for a comparable set of 20 OECD democracies. Research published by the ACMA last month reinforces the value and importance of the ABC to audiences. The News Media in Australia report found that the national broadcaster was popular with Australians for news in 2024, with the ABC having the most accessed outlets for all platforms on which it offered a news service. At the news brand level, the ABC held the greatest share of Australian adults' attention in 2024. Not only were ABC services used, importantly, audiences also said that they relied on them. The research found that the ABC had the most relied on news outlets on free-to-air TV, on catch-up or streaming, on radio, and for online news. ABC News Daily was the most relied on news podcast in the nation. Never has information been more powerful, never has the truth been so under attack, never has the need for proper funding of public broadcasters been greater. We know that today bad actors are using channels of misinformation and disinformation to influence the outcome of national elections. Highly credible allegations about this have been made about Russian state-sponsored interference in the electoral systems of the Ukraine, the United States, the United Kingdom, Georgia, Moldova, and most recently in Romania, where an election result had to be annulled and a prominent candidate banned from running. That's before we get to the activities of Elon Musk's X. This is a world in which democratic elections cannot automatically be assumed to be free of foreign interference. It is foolish in the extreme to believe we will be immune from this global trend. A strong ABC is needed to ensure Australians are fully and truthfully informed about the workings of their democracy. We need to flood the zone with truth to prevent others flooding it with, put simply, lies. The 2025 election campaign is a case in point. Our coverage is of unprecedented scope and quality. The ABC will harness our network of reporters and radio programs in 67 separate locations across Australia to find out what really matters to voters. Our Your Say initiative will ensure their voices are heard in the national conversation. The ABC's lineup of political journalists will keep them on top of unfolding events every day. Vote Compass will show Australians how their views align with those of the candidates and the political parties. Hidden Campaign will expose the tactics used to target and woo voters with the ABC News Verify, scrutinising misinformation and disinformation on the campaign trail. The campaign coverage will be available across our television and radio networks, our digital platforms, the ABC News website, ABC iView, ABC Listen, as well as on third-party platforms like YouTube that are increasingly used by audiences to access primary news. The ABC also has longer-term plans for strengthening our electoral system, and later this year, the inestimable Annabelle Crabb will be presenting a new three-part documentary series explaining to Australians of all ages the uniqueness, strength and practical workings of our wonderful, thoroughly independent electoral system. Few countries in the world can boast an organisation as well run and as trusted as the Australian Electoral Commission. Its old-fashioned use of paper ballots and old-fashioned sense of ethics and integrity make it the best. We all need our people to understand it and to feel proud of it, because it is genuinely free from even the possibility of political interference. And I want to see our schools especially use this program to teach civics to the next generation of Australian voters as to just what a blessing we have in our electoral system. It will be another example of how the ABC is taking extraordinarily seriously its responsibility not only to education, but also to the vital value of civics in our society. I want to end by heaping my personal praise on the efforts of all Australian journalists, particularly those at the ABC, for their great coverage of the recent ex-tropical cyclone Alfred. Fortunately, we dodged the full force of angry nature. Better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. Nevertheless, as I, perhaps way too often, describe the ABC as the mirror, the microphone and the camera to the nation, the ABC performed as a well-tuned partner across those harrowing days. Our people were outstanding. Regional and local news and radio teams across southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales collaborated on the coverage, including our bureaus in Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Coffs Harbour, Toowoomba, Hervey Bay, Rockhampton, Bundaberg, Townsville, Lismore and Port Macquarie. The Queensland and New South Wales metro and regional radio teams, supported by the emergency broadcast team, collaborated to broadcast more than 200 hours of dedicated cyclone and flood coverage on the event. I'm confident that had Alfred hit us full on, the Australian media would have been brilliantly positioned to serve the community with the accurate and up-to-date information our people needed to make literally life and death decisions, and by helping keep their chin up in the most difficult of times. As it was, the effects of the ex-tropical cyclone were bad enough, and the information provided was incredibly well appreciated by the people in the flooded regions. We not only provided accurate warning advice for the Bureau of Meteorology and emergency services organisations, but we also deployed our audiences in the news gathering effort, receiving updates from those listening on their old school battery-powered radios, enabling us to help others understand what was going on nearby. We received many messages of thanks from those in the winds and the water's path. Here are a few. Dear presenters, our power has just been restored, day 6. Thank you very much for helping us through stories, helping with our decision-making, planning, and just making us feel safe. Another, thank you for your wonderful coverage. Very helpful, as we have no power or internet. Can you please check when power is due to come on the northern end of Macleay Island? And another, good morning. I just wanted to say how utterly grateful I am to each and every one of you at ABC Brisbane for your special coverage of old mate Alfred. You kept me company, sane, entertained and informed, and I feel as though I now have new friends. I could read messages like that for hours. In fact, I received hundreds and hundreds of them. It can be quite wearing at times, because in a job like mine, you get a heck of a lot of feedback. Most of it is remarkably emotionally unhinged and rich with the most extreme set of non-values. And to receive messages like that pardon me, can be helpful. If the scientists are right, if the scientists are right, and today's extreme weather events are but a foretaste of worse to come, there can be no greater illustration of the need for media presence and media freedom. In times of danger, dependable information keeps people alive. Democracy dies in darkness, and without accurate, truthful, timely news, our citizens die in floods and fires and cyclones. I've always been a collector of punchy aphorisms and probably irritatingly quote them a little too often. Nevertheless, I could not pass by this observation from Mark Twain, which is as apposite and pungent today as it was in the 19th century. A lie can travel halfway round the world while the truth is still putting its boots on. What we do as members of the media is more than a public service. It's something inseparable from the workings of the nation. We need an extremely strong and well-funded media. We need a strong and well-funded ABC. After all, we're partners together in serving the nation and what it means to be Australian. Thank you. And apologies for being a bit of a sook.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Kim. My name is Misha Ketchell. I'm the editor of The Conversation. And what I'm going to do is just ask Kim a few questions, and then we're going to throw it open to the floor, and hopefully you will all have questions for us as well. And hopefully they'll be as kind and inspiring as some of those messages that Kim read out. I think it's terrific to see a chair of the ABC that has that level of passion for the work that the ABC does and its role sort of in terms of public service. So, yeah, hopefully we can have a great discussion. Kim, I want to take you to start with, to the very political moment we're in now. Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, yesterday made some comments about the ABC needing to prove its efficiency to sort of win continued support and funding. And the question that formed in my mind was how does the ABC actually go about doing that? So you're talking about all the work you're doing, but it feels like to some extent that message still isn't necessarily getting through, or there's a feeling that there's more work to be done.
Well, I think we all need to remember that if people are determined not to listen, you just can't stop them. And we are, in fact, that is a misuse of an H.L. Mencken quote, you know, one of his many aphorisms, and I'm a collector of all of them. It was, if the public don't want to come, you just can't stop them.
Okay.
I think it's funnier than the room does. I think it was wonderfully pungent. Yeah. So it is always difficult when you meet hard, ingrained, determined refusal to engage with facts. The ABC has responded to many, many inquiries, and I had anticipated, Misha, that you might ask a question in this direction. Surprise, surprise. Section 8 of the ABC Act is which describes the duties of the board, and the three primary duties of the board are: first, to ensure that the functions of the corporation are performed efficiently and with the maximum benefit to the people of Australia. Section 2 of subsection 2 of Section 8 of the Act requires that the board defends the integrity and independence of the ABC, and Section 3 refers to the requirement for impartiality and objectivity in the collection and dissemination of news and information. In fact, I'm wont to quote those parts of the Act frequently and always travel with the ABC Act in my accompanying briefcase. It is important to indicate that this is not a fresh observation made by the Leader of the Opposition. There have been numerous inquiries as to efficiency and quality of operation on the part of the ABC going back to the Howard government in 1996 with the Mansfield Review. The Mansfield Review, I think, was preceded just immediately before it commenced with a cut. Mansfield recommended increased investment. 2006 saw the KPMG review commissioned by the Howard government, which recommended an increase of, from memory, $125 million in the ABC back in 2006 dollars. And then we had, under Tony Abbott, the Lewis Review, which was about ABC and SBS efficiency in 2014, but it had a determined remit to cut both organisations. Then the Turnbull government commissioned the Tonner and Bean Review, which was again described as an efficiency review, and that was in 2018. In all of those instances of Mansfield, Lewis, Tonner and Bean, they were precursors to large to medium, I might say, funding cuts. As I outlined in my remarks, in the very, very challenging world in which we are all operating, a well-resourced and empowered ABC has never been more important in being a bastion for truthful journalism. I don't think the ABC has anything to apologise for in its continuing quest for excellence and in its continuing obligation to operate efficiently. Now, of course, one person's efficiency is another person's extravagance. I mentioned in the speech that we are covering this election from 67 different places in Australia. I mentioned in the speech that emergency broadcasting came from a very wide variety of ABC bureaus across the length and breadth of the northern New South Wales area, extending through to Hervey Bay up in Queensland, with multiple services that we have in those regions. I mentioned that we have 600 staff that are deployed in regional Australia, and that we have the widest coverage of regional Australia. In fact, the coverage of the ABC in terms of personnel and services is larger than every other media organisation in Australia combined and multiplied by quite a large number. Yeah. Now, in one person's view, that could be seen as being inefficient. I would see it as being in the interests of comprehensive care for the community and, pardon me, in the interests of having a well-informed community that is not disadvantaged by reason of where it lives.
Okay. I guess another aspect of this is the question of audience reach. There was some criticism in the News Corp newspapers about a month ago about the cost of the ABC and making some assertions about its reach. The radio figures did come out last week, and they weren't looking good in terms of, particularly Radio National, where there's been a significant overhaul. Are you comfortable about the direction of those programming changes? And how do you think about audience, not just the quality of the journalism itself, but the obligation to reach out to wider audiences, and how you sort of manage to achieve that in the digital age?
Look, I think the less said about Mr. Drill's article, which went across every News Corp masthead in the nation, the better, because there was no reliable factual evidence contained in any of that article. In fact, virtually everything that was published was untruthful. Generally, I do not believe in responding to News Corporation commentary on the ABC because it is clearly unhinged. Nevertheless, in that instance, I saw the necessity of issuing a 3-page rebuttal that actually countered each and every statement, because they're not facts, on the misrepresentation of what the ABC is and does and how it gets measured. In fact, to say that I was irritated is to understate the severity of my response to that particular article. And I suspended activities for some time that day to issue the rebuttal on the same day that it was published. Needless to say, it was published by no one other than The Guardian, and that was to be expected. But of course, I helpfully ensured through the terrific teams at the ABC that it went into every politician's inbox across the nation, in state governments and in the Commonwealth government, to say, this is drivel, this is fiction. It has no kind of adherence to any notion of objective reporting. Now, the ABC should be accountable at all times to parliaments, to the community, to all manner of critics. But it is not in any way reasonable that it should be a respondent to fiction. It's simply not reasonable. Now, the radio ratings that came out a few days ago is one ratings moment in a cycle of reviews of performance. It didn't go into all of the massive uplift and the transfer of listening that has moved into podcasting on the part of Radio National programming. It didn't go into all of the streaming that is taking place in the way in which people consume material very differently now from the way that they consumed it 10 or 12 years ago. Most of the radio ratings methodology in Australia would be regarded as being what I might describe diplomatically as being historically quaint, and is primarily there to bolster commercial positionings by various commercial radio offerors. But if you want to get into the weeds of actually understanding what is happening in the community, you need to apply a much more sophisticated analysis to the way in which listening and viewing patterns are taking place. And you certainly need to be looking at a variety of diverse media that have little to do with normal ratings registrations. For example, in the case of video with YouTube.
does it register that the Triple J as a network around the country has over 2.2 million YouTube subscribers that regularly visit the service? Does it mention that Instagram has 1.2 million, again, Instagram, again, Triple J subscribers? No. But these are relevant and quite vitally important facts in terms of the way in which the patterns of consumption are moving and the way in which delivery must migrate with them.
Okay. Just one more question from me, which is, you've been in the role for a year now. You've obviously had many strong opinions and ideas coming into it. I'm wondering if there's anything on which you've changed your mind in the past 12 months, if there's anything in your experience at the ABC, any ideas that you sort of came into the role with where your experiences have actually led you to change your views, or whether really it's been sort of a confirmation of the plan that you started with.
There are many things that I have changed my view on that I would not be willing to share with a
just one
with a large gathering of media people. But I certainly am deeply impressed by the astonishing reach and I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm upset. I'm being foolish, probably because I'm rather tired, but not emotional. It doesn't have the addition of...
Not in the old journalistic version of emotional.
Kind of libation. But I'm astonishingly impressed by the depth and intensity of commitment so many in the ABC offer to the community. Now, I would want that to be doubled down. I think that in fact there's no greater honour. I'm deeply impressed by the work of the ABC with children. I'm very impressed with ABC Education Studios, and that was a very refreshing surprise to me, particularly the relationships with all of the departments of education, as is required under the Act, and is a really, really impressive effort and unsung. International efforts and all of the Pacific Network, I think, is a thing to take great pride in. And that, with the exception of the Cook Islands, which of course is a former colony of New Zealand and therefore has a special relationship with New Zealand, the ABC now has correspondents throughout the Pacific. And that's been good in Pacific territories in coverage of by professional journalistic intensity in their own nations, and also in a flow back to Australia, and that also encompasses Timor-Leste. And that has all come as a very pleasant reminder of the scope and reach of the ABC. There are some areas where I think the ABC significantly has lost the plot and drifted. I think its underperformance in documentary is deeply alarming, and it needs to be corrected and redirected as a matter of utmost urgency.
How are you going to do that?
Investment. Reprioritisation.
Is it just investment? Are there other strategic things?
Refocus on things that matter, things that count, things that are distinctive, things that are rich with purpose, things that are fundamental to the performance and the legislative and media remit of the ABC. The ABC should never be guilty of being a Me Too organisation. It should be confidently, distinctively different and independent from other media. This is fundamentally important.
Okay. We might move to questions from the room. Now, I'm told I have to relinquish my microphone, so what I'll do is try to direct traffic, but the microphone will come around to you. So please just put up your hand if you have a question.
Sorry. Thanks. Mr. Williams, Natalie Whiting from the ABC. You spoke about the fact the ABC has responded to many government reviews over its time. Given what Mr Dutton has had to say around efficiency, are you expecting, if he is elected, that there would be some kind of review, and what impact do you think that could have for the ABC?
I have no doubt about it. I think that this is a room full of journalists. You're all well tuned to reading coded language. I don't think there's any doubt that in the event of of Mr Dutton acceding to office, that there would be a very early call for an efficiency and apparently an excellence review on what the ABC does. Game on. The ABC is an accountable institution, and I have no doubt it will perform well in any such review.
Hi, Adeshla from The Guardian. We have reported this week that you have sought multiple meetings face-to-face with Peter Dutton, which has so far been unsuccessful. If you were given the opportunity before or after the election to sit down with Mr Dutton, what would you want to say to him?
Well, I won't confirm or deny that report, and I do not comment publicly on meetings that I have with politicians of a rich diversity of character. I'm a well-known figure in the Australian Parliament. I'm well-known in electorate offices across the length and breadth of Australia, and will continue to make my role as Advocate-in-Chief for the ABC a primary reason for being as Chair of the ABC. Anything that I would say to Mr Dutton will be said to Mr Dutton. Thank you very much.
Hey Kim, Callum Jaspin from the Herald and the Age. Sort of following on Misha's question there, you came in with this sort of remit and did many speeches like this last year where you made the appeal for greater funding and a greater expansion of the ABC's services. Working off the sort of theory that there is a possibility that funding is reviewed, as you've just said, after a potential coalition victory, is there sort of a reassessment of from yourself or an admission that some areas might need to be seeded on with regard to the ABC's services?
I certainly wouldn't be having that conversation in public or with a journalist from another media organisation, Callum, as I think you expect me to respond. I certainly have not at any stage indicated that we need to expand the service range of the ABC. I think that clearly the ABC is a respondent to all of the necessary avenues to the Australian people with its existing set of services and the way in which content is provisioned to where Australians are consuming content. On efficiency, I have no doubt whatsoever that there is always some room for improvement in some aspect of the life and work of any institution. You know, institutions are complicated beasts. Technology can provide refreshed possibilities for efficiency. And in a similar way, there are a number of ways in which you can review the way in which you make things. But I'm not going to go into some kind of public report card on that. No way.
Do you have a question, Danny? Do you have a question? Danny, say it. Just over here. Just over here.
Apologies.
Hi Kim, hi Misha. Danny Said from Crikey. Kim, last time you made a press club appearance, you went viral. Did you learn anything about the global information economy after your remarks about Joe Rogan? And when are you launching the Kim Williams Experience podcast?
Look, I think that is clearly not going to happen ever. But I learned a lot about pylons. Within minutes of speaking about Mr. Rogan and making some modest observations about Mr. Rogan and his program, I had every device in my life consumed with tens of thousands of messages of varying vocabulary and grammatical firmament, which took over my life. I mean, I cannot begin to describe to you how vile many of these messages were and how violent so many of them were. And the irony was that this was all in the service, allegedly, of free speech. I found it a most instructive experience. I found it helpful to understanding many of the grave dilemmas that we all confront in media, finding personally as to what the triumphalism of so much of the I don't think you could grace it with calling it rhetorical flourish, but so much of the content of social media and its direction is focused. And of course, it was immensely inconvenient because it paralysed my phone, it paralysed my 2 iPads, it paralysed my computer, it paralysed my personal email, it paralysed every aspect of contact with the world, which clearly was less than convenient. And given the relatively modest comments that I had made about entrepreneuring business outcomes from people's fear and anxiety and vulnerability, I thought it was a pretty unattractive outcome.
Hello, Mr. Williams. Joseph Carbone from The Australian. You answered my question about radio quite emphatically, so I'll ask this one instead. Do you consider the move to Parramatta to have been a success in terms of the difference it's made to the ABC's news gathering and coverage?
I think the move to Parramatta, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the ABC Sydney radio services and a very substantial portion of ABC News in video has been relocated to Parramatta in the largest single decentralisation that has occurred in the ABC's history. And we have seen the most modern audio studios and video studios in Australia located at the ABC Parramatta studios, and I think it's been a terrific initiative in taking the ABC much more directly into Greater Western Sydney, which I remind Melbournians represents 1/10 of the Australian population, in a way which is editorially wholesome and necessary. And it places the ABC in the centre of an immensely important part of social change and social growth in the Australian community. And I think that's a good thing to have happened. And I think the ABC and its audiences, and there are many ABC audiences, will benefit immeasurably from that move.
I might stand because you probably can't see me. Okay, my name is Manpreet Kaur Singh. I work with SBS. Can I first say that it was really beautiful for you to be so human about the coverage of Cyclone Alfred, and how all of our staff members across all media organizations have done that. It's beautiful to see a leader come out and state that vulnerability, that we are human at the end of the day when we deal with stories, that they're just not stories. So thank you for that. I would like to ask you, over the years that you have been associated with journalism, how have you seen the media landscape evolve? I ask as a person with the last name Singh, with the skin color that I have, and you can see the room around here, and you can see newsrooms around the country. A nation that has a third of people born overseas and half of the nation with parents born overseas. How representative are we? How well have we done over the last few years? And is there a role for broadcasters like ABC and SBS to take a lead and inspire, especially in the commercial media?
Thank you for that question. It's a very good and necessary question, and a question which goes to the heart of contemporary relevance of an organisation like the ABC or the SBS. And it's a question that needs to be posed on a regular basis as to how are you actually a relevant institution providing necessary services that enhance the community's knowledge and perspective on things of consequence in our society, and also on things that need to be shared in terms of storytelling and celebration of achievement and of simple human creativity. I operate from a perspective that I think the SBS and the ABC are both invaluable components to our society, and when you look at societies that don't have services like that, you are reminded as to how vital these enterprises are. But the enterprises should never take audiences and their role for granted, and they should always be striving to ensure that each and everything they do is making a difference and is being actually responsible in performing to real standards. And speaking very truthfully, I think that one needs to heighten the discussion about standard and focus and purpose inside institutions such as ours, in order to ensure that one has a collective sense of unity in serving that purpose. I think it's fundamentally important.
We're going to have to wrap it up, so we've just got two more final questions. John and then...
John Fane, Kim Williams. Is there a connection between your tears today and the Joe Rogan pylon?
No, there's no connection in tears with Joe Rogan. I mean, I'd have to say, I try to be a relatively objective and assiduous worker in my role. I did at times with the Joe Rogan experience, the subsequent experience, and the messages from people like Kanye West and Mr. Musk, who's directed individual messages to me, sharing their wisdom. I did at times surrender to a pretty white-hot fury.
Emma Johnston, University of Melbourne. You've spoken of the...
No doubt that will happen again now.
Huh.
It's
fury?
I can feel it coming.
I hope that's not in response to my question, but I'm a little scared now. You've spoken of integrity and independence as being absolutely critical to quality journalism, and I'm sensing also to free speech. Universities also hold integrity and independence as key to our academics being able to research and discover and pursue new knowledge. I'm just wondering how you think the press and the higher education sector, or the education sector more broadly, can work together to defend integrity and independence in the face of what we see as substantial intervention.
Well, I mentioned in the speech that we need to flood the zone with truth, and we need to absolutely populate society with facts and with relevant analysis and relevant caring presentation of the diversity of views that are obviously extant on major issues of policy in our society. I think there should be a much more vigorous interaction between tertiary institutions and media organisations like the ABC. And I think there is a tendency in environments that are so governed by at times unusually and unreasonably severe commentary that is rooted in opinion rather than in objective appraisal, that there's a lot to be said for people being much more engaged with each other rather than having this recessive kind of reversion to the equivalent of a snail shell.
Okay. We're out of time, so we're going to wrap up there. I'd just like to once again thank Kim Williams for an extraordinary heartfelt speech and for talking to us today. Thank you very much.